Dear delegates to the symposium, to the famous Cambridge Symposium, I'm very happy to participate this year in this event, this prominent event in the field of anti-corruption and anti-bribery. Even if it is held remotely, it's really worthwhile that we continue the discussion, that we continue the reflection on how to fight best financial crime and in particular corruption. I have chosen a different topic, in fact, from the subject I was assigned to in the program, in the initial program, because I think we need to look at really what's happening under the current circumstances, namely the crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, and what is the impact on corruption and how we can fight better corruption in this context. The first issue which comes to mind is that the crisis, the current environment, are very prone to bribery and corruption. In normal times, already, the health sector is quite prominent for corruption. It is about 8% of the cases which have been detected in this sector. So since the convention the OECD convention was adopted. So there is a risk by nature, normally, but the risks are just exacerbated in the current period of time. Why? Because there has been a massive influx of public money to support the economy. The public procurement procedures have been softened in some cases, and therefore maybe there are less controls and less attention paid to possible wrongdoings. And the police and the law enforcement, they might have other priorities. They might be, paying more attention to other crimes. So there is this risk, and how the law enforcement authorities can do their work properly in this context when, for example, the courts might be closed or might function differently. So, and how to get and to record the evidence with the sanitary measures, all sorts of questions which make that the current context, again, is ripe to bribery and corruption. So what to do? The first thing to do is, as often and as usual, respect the rule of law and implement the international standards that governments have committed to follow. The first, of course, I have in mind is the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention. And this is why in April of this year, the member countries of the Working Group on Bribery of the OECD published a public statement to reaffirm their commitment to combat international bribery. Beyond the commitment at the international level, how things must evolve in practice. In practice, of course, we rely a lot on the law enforcement community to counter on the grounds bribery and corruption. So, and how does this work? First, it's obviously very important that detection continues to take place. And here, as we all know, there's a key role which is played by the whistleblowers. So more than ever, they must be protected because, again, their role is critical. And then the reports which are received by the police or other authorities, they must be taken seriously. They must be investigated with the due attention they deserve. And when we talk about law enforcement, as often it is so important to ensure that investigations and prosecutions are protected from influence, political influence or national interest consideration, as the Article 5 of the OECD Convention provides for. And finally, when we talk about law enforcement, maybe it goes without saying, but it's very important that they have adequate resources to continue their work, and that the money or their resources are not distracted by other consideration in the current circumstances. Finally, a word about the private sector, more than a word, in fact, because the private sector has a key role to play, and it's very important that they act in complement to what the public authorities are doing. When I think about the private sector, I'm thinking also of small businesses. They have a key role to play, and continue to apply the internal controls, the compliance measures within companies is key to accompany the response by the public sector. In the troubled times we are living, one issue is particularly important, and this issue is business intermediaries. In normal time, we know that intermediaries are a source of corruption, potentially, sometimes more than potentially. But in the crisis, they represent a greater source of concern. So really, more caution should be given to the use of business intermediaries by companies. And finally, in the current context, there are new risks which are even more acute than in normal times. I'm thinking of illegal trafficking, the counterfeiting of pharmaceutical products, medicine products. As I said, the health sector is very sensitive to corruption. So the lesson from this very short consideration of the crisis, COVID-19, the sanitary crisis, is that we should maybe study this very closely and see how governments, law enforcement, and business react. And therefore, at some stage, once this is over, draw the lessons, and maybe the lessons will be used or could be a potential use for future global crisis in the future. Maybe not sanitary, but global crisis. And because our line, the priority is that whatever the circumstances, the measures to fight corruption and other financial crimes must continue to apply. Thank you very much for your attention.